Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. My guest today is Brooke Gladstone, co-host and managing editor of WNYC's On the Media. She's won multiple awards for her reporting, including a National Press Club Award and 2 Peabody Awards. She's also the author of 2 books, Influencing Machine, a media manifesto in graphic form, and most recently, The Trouble with Reality, a rumination on moral panic in our time, which came out this May. Brooke Gladstone, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
You know, On the Media, I've been listening to it for years, and it's been on the air now since 2001, which it seems almost like yesterday to me, but really it's over 16 years ago when I counted. So I thought we'd start there. I wonder if you could talk about how you first got involved with On the Media and what sort of plans or goals you might have had for the show going in.
Well, I was NPR's first media reporter. They created that beat back in 95, and I was coming back from Moscow, where I had been reporting for NPR for 3 years. So I took it because it was in New York, and my husband's job was going to be in New York, and the timing was perfect, and I really wanted to go back in New York anyway, which is where I grew up. And it was a great 6 years. I learned a huge amount, but fundamentally, I wanted to broaden the beat. I didn't want it to just be about journalism or business or tech. I wanted it to be about all the ways we hold up the mirror of the world to ourselves, or even hold up a mirror that reflects ourselves back at each other. And that meant that we had to go way out of the normally prescribed media type areas, and we all agreed, the staff that relaunched the show at that time, because it had been on before, it was just a different kind of a show, a different kind of format, that we were going to define media as broadly as possible, which meant everything from license plates to, fluorescent neckties.
And so then, as the show developed and grew over the years, how did things change? Would you say?
Well, you see, the beauty of our incredibly broad, subject area is that it ebbed and flowed. I mean, when we started, there was more culture. We talked a lot more about the way that there were themes for sitcoms, or if there's a movie and then there's a sitcom and then there's a drama and so on, and they're all about, say, adultery. We would draw those themes and ponder what that said about the culture. After 9/11, which happened pretty soon after we launched, it became a lot more about freedom of information, freedom of speech, secrecy, protecting sources. These are things that we call enabling conditions. They aren't, strictly speaking, media or even journalism, but they enable those things to happen. And we felt that there was an increasing threat to those, and so we added those to our brief of subject areas to discuss. And of course, those haven't moved. As time has gone on, we've talked increasingly about the impact of social media, the changing role of the audience, media, and politics in an infinite number of variations.
We want to thank our sponsor, Blue Apron, the #1 fresh ingredient and recipe delivery service in the United States. Their mission is to make incredible home cooking accessible to everyone. It even works for me, and trust me, if Blue Apron can work for me, I'm Mr. Disaster in the kitchen, it can work for anyone. And they do it all with super fresh, high-end quality ingredients, partnering with local farms, fisheries, and ranchers across the country, and sourcing ingredients to support a sustainable food system. Jay, you're a Blue Apron customer too. What do you think about them?
The greatest part for me is the convenience. A lot of times, making a home cooked meal for the whole family sounds good in theory, but in practice, it can prove difficult with different schedules and people going places and just having to get everything together. And then you forgot something and have to run to the store to get it. With Blue Apron, it's all there, and it really streamlines the process, cuts out so much of the prep time. So you get to just the actual cooking part, and it's great for the kids to be able to participate in cooking, which is something, their generation kind of misses out on a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and the meals are really amazing. I mean, upcoming meals right now: seared chicken and creamy pasta salad with summer squash and sweet peppers, creamy shrimp rolls with quick pickles and sweet potato wedges, and chili butter steaks with Parmesan potatoes and spinach. My mouth is watering right now.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, and all of this delicious goodness, less than $10 per person per meal, delivered right to your door. Now check out this week's menu and get your first 3 meals free with free shipping by going to blueapron.com/TPG. You'll love how good it feels and tastes to create incredible home-cooked meals with Blue Apron, so don't wait. That's blueapron.com/TPG. Blue Apron, a better way to cook. Yeah, nowadays, On the Media is broadcast, I believe, in over 400 public radio stations across the country. And of course, it's also distributed as a podcast where it's regularly ranked toward the top of the charts there. And so pretty clearly, On the Media has been a pretty big success. And so I'm wondering, what do you attribute that success to?
I think it has a lot to do with 2 things in particular. And one is that we don't regard this is a show for specialists. This has always been a show for people who consume media, which is everybody, even if you don't know it. And so the way that we have presented every story is with stakes. It's not about what people who make media or what journalists care about, although presumably they would be among the first to care, but it's about what are the messages are you getting? What are the tools you need to interpret what those messages are? How can we sort of clarify what that message is? How can you be a smarter news consumer, or how can you be a more fulfilled media consumer in general? And so it's always been directed towards the consumer, and so that's one big part of it. The other part of it is that people are so close to the media these days. They are the media. It's almost indistinguishable. The NYU professor and blogger for PressThink, Jay Rosen, said that we should refer everyone who's listening to this as the people formerly known as the audience. Everybody who is listening to this can make their own media. They can also contribute to the media environment in positive ways and negative ones, like reflexively retweeting something doesn't help. It really doesn't help. A lot of what's wrong with the media is on the audience and the way they interact with it. I'm not saying it's entirely their fault, but I'm saying there's a symbiotic relationship for both good and bad.
Right. Do you think that it's harder for most people to be a smart media consumer now than it was back in, say, 2001 when the show started?
I wouldn't say it's a good question. Harder. What do we mean by harder? It's possible to be a much better consumer of news and information now than back in 2001, because there are so many more sources of news, both domestically and internationally. But it's also much more complicated. And here's the thing, is that as time has gone on, I mean, when we began, the Facebook was, had left the campus and had become a global phenomenon, but not anything like it is today. And the fact is, and this is really crucial, studies have shown that most people get the bulk of their news now curated by their social media feeds, and particularly Facebook. So back in the day, back before digital media, there were a handful of media gatekeepers that decided what news was worth reporting and what news wasn't. That kept out a lot of garbage. That kept out the birthers and the truthers and the kinds of stuff that generate so much outrage. But of course, it kept out a lot of voices that never get heard and a lot of stories that never get told. So now those stories can be told and those voices can be heard. And we have a responsibility to listen, but we also have a responsibility for gatekeeping and curating for ourselves. Curating is a much better word in this context. We have to make sure that we are hearing not just validation, but things that challenge us. And that's a lot easier to say than it is to do, because frankly, it can be a kind of sickening experience to go outside of your echo chamber and listen to people who have drawn different conclusions from a similar pool of facts. I say that very carefully because, of course, now we live in a time where everybody has their own facts, and that's been talked about a lot. But it doesn't help. You can congratulate yourself if you reach out from your bubble and you tune into some lunatic like, InfoWars or something really extreme, and then you go back to your bubble and you say, I tried. But it's just validating when you go to the most extreme version of your opposite, right? So the thing is to venture out, but near enough by that you can't dismiss people entirely, people who actually have studied the issues. And those people are out there.
Yeah. I think this kind of leads sort of directly into, well, really, in a way, both of your books. I kind of want to take them in order. The first one, The Influencing Machine, and I remember when it came out, I heard about it and I was getting ready to write my own book about politics and media, and I thought, well, I definitely got to get this. But then my second thought was, a graphic nonfiction format? I mean, that was something entirely new to me. So maybe we could start by talking about why you chose that way to present your ideas.
Mm-hmm. Well, about The Influencing Machine, I actually emptied my brain into that book. If you read it, you probably know it may be graphic, but it can be pretty dense. People will say it takes a while, but I think the pictures really helped. And there was a variety of reasons. For one thing, I started out by wanting to write an adventure comic book, a futuristic comic book. I am a complete science fiction fiend. I consume it all the time. I wanted to try writing some. In the end, I found that I could do plots and characters and settings, but God damn it, I could not plot my way out of a paper bag. Just things wouldn't happen. And in the end, and I was writing it for DC Comics, my wonderful editor said, here are a few suggestions. And then she told me what they were, and they were brilliant suggestions, and I just went dark. I just thought, wow, I'm going to have to start this thing all over again. And then she said, maybe you should write a nonfiction thing about the media. And I just went, no, Primal Scream. This is all about escaping from the media. But ultimately, I did do that. And it was great. It was like my own graduate school. I wrote it in 2011. I learned a huge amount, and I consolidated a tremendous amount of information that I had gathered through the years. I've been a quarter century on this beat, more or less. And so I chose the comic book form because I had a radio voice. I knew how to speak on the radio. Didn't have a prose voice that I was very confident with. And so I thought it made more sense for me to speak in bubbles and to talk directly to the audience. Another thing is that it forces so much discipline. You cannot waste a word. Also, the challenge of finding the pictures, because the difference between an illustrated book and a graphic novel or a graphic nonfiction book is that in an illustrated book, the pictures support the text, but in a graphic book, the pictures replace the text. Therefore, as my colleague and co-creator of The Influencing Machine, Josh Neufeld, the illustrator, told me, I have to come up with the pictures. He can't read my mind. He will draw them, or if he thinks that they're not going to work, he'll tell me, and we'll work out something else. But fundamentally, I have to find out what I want to say with the pictures, and then I describe what's in it, where the bubbles should go. Here are a few reference links to Civil War costumes, or ancient Greek, and so on. Here's a picture of a Hogarth print or a photograph from World War II, and here's how I want you to, kind of refashion it. And he was brilliant. He was incredible, and but fundamentally, part of the thrill of writing it that way was to see what I wouldn't have to say in words that I could convey with the image.
Well, I definitely I got a copy of it as soon as I could, and I thought that the result was really impressive. And as you point out, there's really a lot in there, and so I'm going to ask you to do something that might be sort of difficult, but could you sort of give listeners an idea of kind of an overview of what you cover in the book, or at least kind of what you hope readers take away from the book?
Hmm. Right. Well, the influencing machine is, speaking humbly, a kind of history of media, starting pretty much with the creation of the written word, and then going through, not no, in rough but not entirely chronological order, to about the year 2042. In other words, there's some projection going on. It basically describes how we started telling ourselves stories in a durable way, how they've developed the way they did, what are the historical moments where our views of what the media can and should do and how we can do it changed, and then onward, all of the conflicts we have now over such things as biases or historical moments like the Peter Zenger trial, or fundamentally all the ways in which we participate in both the elevation and the debasement of our media mirror. And I think that it's supposed to be funny in places, and I really think it is. It's also really, really sad in places. But I come up with the conclusion that, all told, looking at our history together, now more than ever, we get the media we deserve, which is the last line.
Our second sponsor today is SeatGeek, a great low-cost, super convenient way to buy tickets for live events. With SeatGeek, you can find the best seats at the best prices. It's fully guaranteed, and it only takes a few taps on the app or a few clicks if you access it through their website, SeatGeek.com. I've got the SeatGeek app. I've used it on my computer as well, and whenever I use it, what I really love is I pull it up and it lets me know about all kinds of stuff going on around me, like the 2017 Quaker State 400 Monster Energy Cup. Now, I probably won't be saying that, but it is going on around me. And if I'm a racing fan, hey, it's not just concerts, it's races, it's all kinds of live events. It's really great. I just really like it. And with SeatGeek, you can get updates on whatever, venues, events, performers, whatever you want to keep track of that they sell tickets to live. SeatGeek will have you covered. You can even connect it with Spotify, your music library, Facebook. It'll give you notifications about, artists you listen to or follow, though you can turn that off if you don't like notifications. I don't. I turn it off, but maybe you love notifications. I don't know. Hey, to each his own. And the thing is when you buy a ticket too, it'll even put the date and time of the event on your calendar if you want. I rather would not have that, but maybe you want that. It's convenient. It's great. Anyway, and best of all, if you're a Politics Guys listener, and hey, you are because you're listening right now, you get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. All you have to do is download the SeatGeek app or go to SeatGeek.com and enter promo code PoliticsGuy. That's all one word, PoliticsGuy with no S, today. That's promo code PoliticsGuy for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. So can you sort of unfold that, unwind that a little bit? What did you mean exactly by we get the media we deserve? And I guess maybe even more importantly, is that a good or a bad thing?
Well, you see, I remember I was once on some PBS show with Brian Gumble. It was some kind of a panel, and he asked all the people on the panel, "What grade would you give the media?" And this was more than a dozen years ago, I think, and I was the last one, and people were giving the media low marks, and then I just said, "Well, I give the media A, B, C, D, and F because we have absolutely the best, reporting, the best and most responsible, the best and most ethical media in our history, and also the absolute, definite bottom feeding worst stuff." And each and every facet of our media finds an audience because if it didn't, it really wouldn't exist. So we have to remember that, our role as audiences more than ever affect the kind of media that we get. And we see that even now because, for the first time in a very long time, people are, and perhaps ever, people realize that they're going to have to pay for information. People have never liked to pay for information. They've liked to pay for entertainment, and entertainment is what generally sells media. The news is kind of the afterthought for most people. And especially after the so-called original sin of newspapers and other really responsible news gathering organizations putting their stuff online for free. I mean, they couldn't support themselves, and Craig Newmark comes along and creates Craigslist and takes away pretty much the last shred of regular income they have, and then they start cutting in order to survive, and then they become less valuable. So you're in a vicious spiral. So now, with the advent of this administration, people have decided, or some people have decided, that it is very worthwhile to support their responsible news outlets. And so the Times and the Post are doing much better, and that is a way in which audiences directly participate, because even though it's supposed to be some kind of social institution that protects our democracy, it isn't supported like an institution. It is a business. And that means that people have to participate for it to thrive.
Right. Now, do you think that people don't appreciate that or don't understand that? I mean, the general public, or that essentially that the media is sort of giving us what we're asking for, and they have to do that as a business that needs to, make a profit to survive. I mean, would you say that's a common misperception, that people are blaming the media too much when really they're just sort of reflecting back what the public is demanding?
Like I said, I think it's symbiotic. I mean, I would say that it's great to blame your media outlets and to complain to your media outlets and to demand better from your media outlets. But that's not good enough. If you want better, you should support or you should complain. I'm all for boycotts of advertisers, frankly. I think that that's a perfectly socially responsible thing to do. I don't think that there's anything First Amendment related into registering your displeasure and your unwillingness to support speech that you find objectionable. That's the way the system works. The First Amendment, which people frequently misunderstand, doesn't give you the right to say anything under every circumstance. It gives you the right to be protected from government interference for saying it. If you're out there shouting in the street and then you're shouted down by another group of people, that does not mean your First Amendment right has been abrogated. All it means is that other people with First Amendment rights are louder than you. So, I mean, I love to throw that in there whenever I can, because it's become such a kind of rallying cry these days. So people should understand that it has to do with the government. But in any case, I think that it isn't that they blame their media too much, in answer to your question. It's that they hold themselves too little responsible for responding to it.
Right. A lot of this reminds me of stuff that one of my personal heroes, I guess, Neil Postman wrote, well, way back in the 80s, before all of this stuff, in a book called Musing Ourselves to Death, where he sort of suggested that we were making these choices in a way that steered us toward entertainment and away from the sort of stuff that was good from us, sort of more like taking the ice cream instead of the broccoli or essentially. And I guess to me, I see this more and more, and it makes me sort of sad and concerned. And I'm wondering if you agree that people are just continually making the easy choice and not having the sort of discipline to make the choices for the hard, responsible sort of news.
It's funny that you should mention Neil Postman. You mentioned that I had this other book out called The Trouble with Reality. And, well, maybe you didn't say what it was called, but that's what it's called. But in any case, very early in it, there is a quote from Amusing Ourselves to Death from Neil Postman, which distinguishes between the world that Orwell imagined in 1984 and the world that Aldous Huxley imagined in Brave New World. And do you want me to read you that part?
Oh,
or a
please,
little bit of it?
Please do, yeah.
What Neil Postman wrote in Amusing Ourselves to Death was, Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared that the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared that we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared that we would become a trivial culture. In 1984, Orwell added, people are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. In short, Orwell feared that what we hate will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us.
Wow. And boy, that sounds as true today, it may be even truer today than in, I think it was 1985 or 1986 when he wrote that, a really prophetic book, I think. So I guess, do you see a path out of this? Is this just a downward spiral into amusing ourselves to death, or are you more hopeful than that? Please tell me you're more hopeful than that.
I think that here's what I think about digital media. What I've always thought about digital media that enables us to tailor our world so precisely to our own interests is that it makes us more of what we were going to be anyway, more extreme versions of ourselves. If we were not curious people, if all we cared about was, let's say, volleyball and stamp collecting, then we could limit our media consumption to just those two issues and manage to avoid practically everything else. If we are enormously curious people, we become only more curious, insatiably curious, constantly going down the rabbit holes that the internet provides. It creates, or it fosters a kind of extremism in our life and in our thinking. And the only way to counter that is to recognize how we are wired and see if we can defy that wiring to some extent or another. Now, there's this word that computer types love to use called serendipity, which is the encounters with accidental information that you wouldn't normally seek out. Now, once the front page of your newspaper would do that, it's like you're only interested in what's happening in Washington, say. And then there's an article in the bottom right below the fold about Uganda. You're not really interested in Africa, but there's something about the headline. It catches your eye, and you find yourself reading a story about Uganda, going to the jump, finishing it, and you go, you know what? No, I'm kind of interested in Uganda. And then from that point on, you might pause before skipping over the stories about Uganda. And in an increasingly connected world, it makes sense. We don't live as separated as we did, in the 19th and 20th centuries. And so there you are. That's an occasion of serendipity. Well, that doesn't happen so much if you consume all your information in a place that basically orders stories according to your level of interest. You'll never get there. So if you're devoted, if you allow algorithms or even your own close circle in your cohort to decide what you see, which is how many people do it these days, perhaps most of them, then you will live in a much smaller world, and your pool of information will be absolutely inadequate to truly understand the world as it is. Now, you can go through your whole life not understanding the world as it is. Every once in a while, what you think the world is, your reality will collide with other people's realities, and then you're going to have a mess on your hands. You're going to have to clean up and paste your reality back together, and you won't be as prepared as you might have been to do that. And I think that's where a lot of the anxiety is now politically.
Right. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about your most recent book, which came out just not too long ago, The Trouble with Reality. And it has a subtitle that I really love, A Rumination on Moral Panic in Our Time. That just sucked me in right away. So could you talk about what the genesis of this book was, why you
Sure.
needed to write it?
It's very easy. This is a pretty short story. A couple of weeks after the election, we have a relationship with a publisher. Our station, WNYC, has a relationship with a publisher. We will be doing a book, a collection of our breaking news consumers handbooks, which is something that we've been creating over the last few years at On the Media, but I won't stop and talk about that now. Anyway, they showed up, and the agent and the publisher, and said, we have never felt or heard so much anxiety. Well, we live in the bubble of New York City, so naturally. But, I mean, a kind of high-pitched wail that never seemed to cease. And they said, we want you to address that. And I went, oh, well, I could try, but by the time I've written it and by the time you've put it out, the world could have changed 10 times over. We've been watching it just as we've been covering the news each week. And so I said, I'll tell you what, I will write it in 2 weeks. I will work on this problem in 2 weeks if you promise to get it out in 2 months. So this book was, and they did, and I did. So it's a very small book. It's kind of like, again, humbly, it's like Tom Paine's Common Sense, a treatise or a pamphlet. But the thing is I called it a rumination because basically it's an invitation for readers to spend, a couple of hours with me going down the rabbit holes to figure out the source of the distress that a little more than half the country feels, and how to explain it, why it came to be, how it was, the way that we are wired to create our own realities, why we are wired, why it's necessary, why it is so easy for public figures to hijack those realities, and what we can do to pick up the pieces. I described what was basically a reality crash. My belief isn't that there are two realities in America, a red and a blue one. My belief is that everybody crafts their own. They are handcrafted, artisanal realities that we create based on some facts that are marinated in a bunch of beliefs and traditions and historical notions and values. And there you go. And everybody's world is a little bit different, although some of them have big similarities. They're all basically different. But Americans with very different notions of how the world works and how it's supposed to, they collided. And there was this great shower of shards of broken realities. And if you want to pick yourself out of the shrapnel and paste the new one back together, I offer some insight in the book as to how we got there, and I point in a direction. There's no solution there. This is, as I say, a rumination. I use Neil Postman. I use Philip K. Dick. I use John Milton. I use Hannah Arendt. I use, Lipman. I use many people whose work I respect and others who I just discovered to try and figure out why we're the way we are and what is possible for us as a species. And so that's why it's a rumination. But it's 96 pages, so.
I know we're running a little
little pages.
Yeah, I know we're running a little short on time here. Just one final question for you that I like to ask all of my guests. Aside from on the media and the trouble with reality and the influencing machine, what sort of resources, it could be authors, books, websites, podcasts, what have you, what would you recommend for people who want to get sort of a deeper understanding of media and politics, want to break out of their bubble? Just kind of a short list, some things that might come to mind.
Well, on the left, I think Talking Points Memo is very good. I'm impressed with Vox. And Mike, on the right, I would suggest Commentary, the National Review, the Weekly Standard. You're getting, and of course, I recommend the New York Times and the Washington Post. I think NPR does a good job. I really do. Basically, don't go all the way into crazy land. Just step outside of your comfort area, and at some point, and that is basically for consuming media. I think it might be helpful to look at local papers in places where you don't live. That can be incredibly helpful. There are things happening in other places that you don't know about that create realities that you can't imagine. And I talk a lot in the book about why we are wired to filter our world and why it's necessary. The world is altogether too complex for us to understand in its entirety, but also why we have to be engaged in efforts to do precisely that, to filter less and listen more.
All right. Well, with that, I think excellent advice. We will close. Brooke Gladstone, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
You're very welcome.
That's it for this Politics Guys interview. We hope you liked what you heard and that you'll check out today's sponsors. The first is Blue Apron. Check out this week's menu and get your first 3 meals free with free shipping by going to blueapron.com/TPG. Next is SeatGeek, the fast and easy way to get great tickets to live events at a great price. And Politics Guys listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code PoliticsGuy, that's all one word, no S, just plain Politics Guy, today. Or you can go to their website, SeatGeek.com, and enter that code PoliticsGuy. Hey, if you've got a question, comment, correction, or just a random thought you want to share with us, you can reach us at mail@politicsguys.com. Our Facebook page where you can message us and where we post throughout the week is facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter @politicsguys. We'll be back with a new show on Sunday. We hope you'll join us.